ago, the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago have welcomed and supported more than 13,000 asylum seekers with open arms. These are folks who entered the United States with legal authorization, including young families with children and seniors.
Let me state this clearly. The city of Chicago cannot go on welcoming new arrivals safely and capably without significant support and immigration policy changes. This change would be a common sense measure that would provide greater opportunities for newly arrivals and immigrants to build their lives here in the state of Illinois.
That's just some of what Democrat leaders in the state of Illinois raised yesterday, standing alongside business leaders, pushing for the federal government to allow recent migrants to ultimately come into the state and the nation and get work permits. And also saying it's not just for the recently arrived, it's for those who may be undocumented here as well long term that aren't seeking asylum. So here we are. We've got this movement now, and they're claiming it's bipartisan, but there's a lot of concern that we'll hear from Congressman Darin LaHood about this issue. And I'd love to hear from you as well at 217-629-7970. Again, 217-629-7970. So one thing that Governor J.B. Pritzker talked about yesterday was that the state of Illinois has already put out $250 million, $100 million from the city of Chicago, and they've only gotten reimbursed about $30 million from the federal government, Pritzker said. So ultimately, you've got that deal where their taxpayers are paying for this, and it's not just the housing that the state's paid for. Again, total taxpayer cost, $250 million. You've also got the cost of migrant health care, those who are over the age of 65 in the country as non-citizens and not documented as citizens. They are eligible to get health subsidies in the state of Illinois, and taxpayers are paying that bill of up to $550 million for this fiscal year. There was concern that that could run out of money sometime this fall, so we'll be watching that number closely to see how that plays out, especially with them coming back into fall veto session come October. So obviously that cost and its impact to the budget in the state of Illinois very much up in question. But you had the various Democratic leaders, not just the governor, not just Brandon Johnson, mayor of Chicago. You had Senator Dick Durbin there as well, Congress people from the Democratic side of the aisle, and groups like the Illinois Manufacturers Association and the Illinois Restaurant Association, and an association that caters to those who are landscape architects. So you have these groups coming together saying, all right, we need comprehensive immigration reform, and we need to get work visas to these recently arrived migrants so they can fill the jobs that are needed. But again, let's hear from Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson talking about what he says is a dire situation, that if they don't get federal help, then they're going to be in some trouble. So you'll hear Brandon Johnson, you'll hear Governor J.B. Pritzker, then you'll hear Senator Dick Durbin as well, talking about the types of jobs that he says the migrants are good for. So we'll get to those comments as well here from yesterday's news conference. Again, Johnson, Pritzker, Durbin.
Let me state this clearly. The city of Chicago cannot go on welcoming new arrivals safely and capably without significant support and immigration policy changes. This change would be a common sense measure that would provide greater opportunities for newly arrivals and immigrants to build their lives here in the state of Illinois. The contributions that are made by the immigrant community would certainly strengthen so many vital industries, including food processing, clean energy, healthcare, transportation, and so much more.
A year ago, the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago have welcomed and supported more than 13,000 asylum seekers with open arms. These are folks who entered the United States with legal authorization, including young families with children and seniors. Most often they lack sponsors and have no shelter, and they don't have any resources to obtain it. They have no immediate legal pathway to work. If after these many months, asylum seekers still are not being given permission by the federal government to support themselves with the plethora of available jobs, Well, frankly, this moves from a short-term humanitarian mission to a long-term crisis.
We are desperately in need of workers in this economy. There are jobs that go vacant because American workers are not taking these jobs. These immigrants are ready to step in and take the hardest, dirtiest, roughest jobs imaginable because they always have. And what we heard today from the business leaders, and thank you, Rebecca, for bringing us together, is that in virtually every line of work you can think of, we need these people and we need them now. There are hospitals that are considering cutting back on their services because they don't have basic housekeepers and transporters and basic elements to keep their hospitals open. But if you don't give a flying fig for this moral argument, and you wouldn't care less about it, do it for yourself and your family so that businesses can stay open, restaurants can stay open, hotels can stay open, so that hospitals can provide the basic care that you need. These people are ready to help, and we should give them that chance.
So, again, you've got members of Congress there pushing on the Biden administration to use whatever authority that the president has to allow for these visas to be extended to those who are recently here awaiting a hearing on an asylum request. And then also going even further and giving work visas to other undocumented migrants in the United States. Will the Biden administration adhere to those requests? And what you didn't hear at all in this conversation, something we'll hear from Congressman Darin LaHood when we share his thoughts. No talk about sealing up the border. No talk about putting the wall up, keeping the flood of people coming in from happening at all. No conversation on that. So that's fascinating to hear. Let's get your thoughts at 217-629-7970. Again, 217-629-7970. That's the phone number. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Hey, good morning, Greg.
Hey.
So one of my questions would be, are these people getting Social Security numbers and they're going to contribute to the tax base, like they're going to start paying their fair share like everybody else is supposed to do? Or is it just another burden? Are they taking money from the system and not paying back into it?
Well, listen, I mean, some of the arguments I've heard from the pro-immigration side is a lot of these undocumented are working under the table and they're paying taxes, sales taxes, and if they're paying rent somewhere, then they're paying the property tax through the rent and so on. But they're not getting the benefit from it, right? For instance, if they have a fake Social Security number, then they are paying into Social Security. But since it's a fake number or a fraudulent number, at the end when they go to claim Social Security, they won't get that. And that's why all this needs to be fixed, they say. So there's that component. But when somebody is a documented worker from a different country, a non-citizen who's documented, from my understanding, I'm not a tax expert and I go through the thousands of pages of tax law, but from my understanding is that there's a structure there where they are legitimately paying taxes and so on. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and then one of the other problems, that Durbin and them are mentioning, Americans aren't taking these jobs because the Democrats have put policies in place to pay people to stay home and collect more money from the government than they would make in these types of jobs.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about the economic landscape, what's causing people not to want to go to work. But then when you look at the jobs they're saying need to go to these migrants, it's what? Washing dishes and scrubbing toilets? Is that the value that these people are placing in this population? Let's take another call here. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Yeah, good morning, Greg. As far as I can remember, the reason for unemployment is for people that are looking for work that cannot find it. It's a way to tie them over until they do find employment.
Right.
So if we're going to bring all these people in and put them to work, shouldn't we, that basically tells me that everybody that wants to work is working. So how much are we going to reduce unemployment because of that?
And I don't have that answer, but I think another number you need to look at is the workforce participation rate, which is actually a much stronger indicator of able-bodied people out in the workforce. Guys, we've got to take a break. Coming back, I do want to hear from Congressman Darin LaHood on his thoughts on this, so stay tuned.
This clearly, the city of Chicago cannot go on welcoming new arrivals safely and capably without significant support and immigration policy changes.
That's Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson yesterday. But if you look at other headlines, tempers flare as community meeting on migrant shelter opening at East Hyde Park Hotel. And you've got community members in Chicago upset about what they feel they're being left behind while all this focus and attention is on the migrants. But as you hear the Democrats there push for the Biden administration to relax work visa requirements for those in the country undocumented, nothing part of that conversation sounded anything like closing up the border. There was a little bit of talk of how we need comprehensive immigration reform, but how about we close the border? How about we get troops down on the border, put the wall up, keep people from coming in from all over the world, keep drugs from coming in from all over the world, keep human trafficking from happening at the southern U.S. border. Congressman Darin LaHood chatted with him yesterday about this after the news conference, and here's some of his thoughts. In particular, the question of, are these people going to be properly vetted? Is that a concern that still exists?
Well, yes, absolutely. There's multiple issues that need to be addressed. I mean, first of all, they're violating the law. I mean, we have laws in place in this country that need to be abided by. Secretary Mayorkas has not done that. The further we go down this path of skirting the rules and laws of this country, whether it's allowing illegal immigrants to vote, allowing them to be, part of our government programs, allowing them to stay in the country without adequate hearings. All those things. And then obviously the cost to taxpayers. I'm all for legal immigration, Greg. Listen, my family immigrated from Lebanon a couple of generations ago. I represent a large Lebanese population. But we have a legal immigration system that ought to be abided by. And the further we go down this path of not abiding by that system, we turn into a country where, we're a lawless country. And so that's what worries me. And so I think you're going to get a lot of pushback by me and others in Congress until we secure the southern border.
So, again, I asked if that's a negotiating chip in this to secure the southern border and then have immigration reform and these work permits.
Well, there are many pieces of legislation that would improve upon our legal immigration system, which I'm supportive of. We ought to expand the amount of legal immigrants we bring into the country. We ought to make it a more efficient system. We ought to modernize our system and not make it, 2 or 3 years to legally immigrate to this country. So there are many reasons to change our legal immigration system and our visa system, and I'm supportive of that. But it has to be tied to enforcing the rule of law on the southern border. And when you allow in 4 million people under the Biden administration that have come across the border illegally, that are, again, not complying with the rule of law, then that's problematic. And so I think the two have to be tied together.
So Congressman Darin LaHood responding to the Democrats, the governor, the senator, Durbin, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, pushing for work visas for recently arrived migrants seeking asylum and even those who've been here undocumented for some time, and saying that they need to fill the jobs that Americans aren't willing to fill. So, the latest on that, of obviously it's going to cost taxpayers continuously, and we'll see what happens with the latest twist and turn in that entire conversation. All right, it is Springfield's Morning News on WMAY.